acted all weird and secretive about it, and like it was just a well-known fact that graves are dug at night. So, whatever this is, I think that the people who run our town already know about it. Jacob frowned deeply. "What if it's dangerous?" he whispered. I shrugged. I don't know. I don't know what to think. Right now, it looks like it's just doing its job. After some more debate, we decided to put the phone away and sleep on it. The next day, the funeral would happen, the casket lowered into the grave, and the grave would be filled in the following night. So, we agreed that Jacob would spend the night again Saturday, and we would watch again to see what happened once there was a dead person waiting to be buried. The next morning, I reported for my shift. I gave the fresh grave and the mausoleum a wide berth and hurried to complete my tasks. The place had a whole new air of creepiness about it, and I was interested in getting the heck out. That night, Jacob and I were much more eager to go to sleep early. We fully expected to be woken by the chimes this time, and decided the best way to pass the time would be to sleep until it was zombie time. Plus, we were both exhausted from staying up so long watching the creature the night before. In fact, we named our zombie Clyde. As expected, we were both woken by the soft chime of my phone. This time, Jacob sprang to wakefulness as quickly as I did, and we called up the view of the camera. Clyde must be a creature of habit. He emerged from his strange apartment just as he had the night before, stiffly and slowly. He made his way to the grave he'd worked so hard to dig the night before. Only then did his routine change. The bony character dropped down into the grave. For a long time, there was nothing else to see. We were almost ready to give up and turn it off, when all of a sudden, Clyde's bony fingers emerged from the grave and dug into the earth. We watched with fascination and horror as Clyde rose from the grave. He hauled himself out of the earth, but the thing was, Clyde was holding an arm in his hand, and he was eating it. Oh my God. What is he doing? Jacob shrieked. And then we heard some noise from Clyde. He grumbled and moaned as he chewed on the arm. There were wet, sloppy sounds as the raw teeth gnashed between his ancient teeth, and snapping sounds as the sinewy flesh broke off the bone. His face was smeared with blood, dirt, and shadows of decay. I had the spinning, pounding rush of blood in my head, watching without believing what was happening. I told you zombies eat people, Jacob declared, whispering this time. I thought about it for a minute before answering, but at least it's a person who's already dead. Jacob shoved my arm and stared at me, with his mouth hanging open. Are you serious right now? I mean, I get that it's super disgusting, but you have to admit, he isn't hurting anybody. I cannot believe what I'm hearing, Jacob muttered. What if it's some sort of deal? Clyde does this admittedly horrible job that nobody wants to do, and in exchange, he gets what he needs. Jacob shook his head. This is the most messed up thing I've ever heard. No, look, hear me out. What if it's like the way it is in every graveyard? Maybe all gravediggers are like Clyde. What if it's normal? Jacob stared at me like he was sort of considering punching me. Jason, you've lost it. We absolutely have to call the cops. I frowned. Do cops even have any authority over creatures who are clearly already dead? I mean, seriously. The graves get dug right on schedule when they need to be dug. Then, like magic, they get covered in whenever someone needs to be buried. Do you think George and the other city people seriously don't know how that happens? Jacob sat back and pushed the phone away, contemplating what I'd said. I mean, it's just like my work there. I hardly ever see George. He just leaves a list on the desk in the office of tasks I need to complete. I wouldn't magically know what to do if no one tells me. Clyde seems like he might be even less cognitively inclined than me, so... So what? Jacob interrupted. So, somebody's telling him what to do. Jacob shuddered. Gross. Jacob didn't want to watch anymore, but I did. Clyde went back down into the grave and came out with more pieces of whomever was down there. He trudged his morsels back to the mausoleum home and then came back to methodically fill in the grave in much the same way he dug it. Job well done, Clyde, I whispered. Even though my Clyde theory made good sense, Jacob became obsessed with keeping careful tabs on the grave-digging monster. He downloaded the camera app on his own phone so we could both watch even if we weren't together. For 2 weeks, Clyde's routine continued the same way. He only emerged at night if there was a grave to be dug. Otherwise, his stone door stayed closed and he didn't come out. He always employed the same methodical and archaic way of digging and covering the graves. He always took parts of the bodies within. It was an unbelievable way to live, but Clyde's routine nonetheless. The problems began when a terrible thing happened in our town. Nobody died for over a month. Obviously, that sounds like it's actually a really good thing to have happen for any community. However, by the middle of the summer, no graves had been dug, and one night the chimes woke me up. I watched with great interest as Clyde came out of the tomb, even though I knew there was no grave needed. He stumbled out, seeming far less coordinated, his motions more jerky and unstable. He looked around, his head thrashing in quick, panicked turns. I imagined that if Clyde had eyes, he'd be looking around frantically. My phone rang, and it was Jacob. I was able to pick up the call and go back to the screen while talking to him on speaker thanks to the marvels of modern technology. "What's he doing?" Jacob asked urgently. "No idea," I admitted. Jacob and I silently watched Clyde for a long time. He remained in front of the tomb, looking around frantically with that horrible, eyeless face. Then he leaned his head back and roared, a sound of ancient, primal rage. A sound so terrifying that I hurried to shut off the camera. "Whoa, what's wrong with him?" Jacob said. I didn't want to admit what I was thinking, but I said it anyway. "It's been too long since anyone died, Jacob. He's hungry." In the light of day, we couldn't see a way that this was really our problem, or that we should involve ourselves any further by alerting authorities. Plus, we both still agreed that the authorities had to know about this. The problem arose when the girl disappeared the following night. It was an older teenaged girl. In fact, I'd heard of her before, as she'd just recently graduated from my own high school. Her car was found the morning after she went missing, abandoned alongside the road just outside of town. She'd been coming home late at night from out of town, and presumably her car had run out of gas. Authorities assumed she'd gotten out to walk to town, and from there, they didn't know what happened to her. She could have been picked up, or something could have happened to her once she reached the city limits. There were no leads, but foul play had not been ruled out. The thing of it was, the night this girl would have gone missing, we were woken by the chimes. We'd watched as Clyde had shoved out of the mausoleum. We'd never seen him move so fast. He loped the opposite direction from the graves and was soon out of the camera's view. But it was only moments later when Clyde returned, and he was dragging a teenaged girl, her body limp and lifeless, her throat ripped open and dripping blood. "Oh my God," Jacob had murmured crazily as we sat on the phone together, mesmerized by terror. We both disengaged the camera. We have to call the police now. We have to, Jason. This has gone too far. I raked my hand through the air. I still think there's no way that they don't already know about this. I insisted. Look, we can't do anything to help her now. Let's just think this over and talk about it tomorrow. Once news broke about the missing girl the following morning, the whole town was abuzz talking about how another person had once disappeared on that very road back in the 70s. That one had been a jogger in his 40s. Everyone was fascinated by two strange incidents on the same street in one little old small town. Jacob and I were able to do some digging and discovered that when the last victim disappeared, the town had been in another long period of no deaths. The puzzle pieces came together, and we began to see that as long as Clyde stayed fed, he was fine. But if he was hungry, then it wasn't safe to go past the graveyard at night. And for some reason, the higher-ups in our community were letting this happen. Maybe it was a tradition. Maybe it was a pact with the devil. Maybe it was like this everywhere. Maybe it was why you have to hold your breath going past a graveyard at night. If you hold your breath, the zombies don't know you're there. What might happen to a citizen who became aware of this dark conspiracy and attempted to confront the authorities? After all, they were willing to accept the horrible deaths of a middle-aged jogger and a young woman driving at night. In fact, they would need to protect these secrets at all costs. We were suddenly happy we hadn't gone to the police. Well, don't hate me for this, Jacob, but he got what he needed. Maybe it'll be fine. People here can't stay alive forever. People will start dying again, and Clyde will go back to normal. Jacob looked at me like I was insane. At the same time, he couldn't argue with my logic. What could we do? The problem was the ban on death continued. People were apparently going through some weird, super healthy, super careful streak in our town, and nobody died. Another 6 weeks passed and brought us into the fall without a single death. Then, we were woken one night by the chimes. Just as he'd done the night of the unfortunate girl, Clyde came out of the mausoleum just to wish for a grave, scream at the moon. We have to stop him, Jacob said urgently when he showed up on my doorstep by 6 a.m. the following morning. If anybody goes by there, he's going to kill him. What are we supposed to do? We can't know when someone will go by. If we get woken up by the chimes, it'll be too late for us to get there and warn the person. We have to be the people that go by. We'll know he's coming, and we'll cut off his head. Are you crazy? I demanded. He's just some decayed old dirtbag, Jason. We can do it. Jacob and I got into a big fight about this. In the end, he agreed to give up the idea, or I threatened to go to the police after all. And we were both more scared of that idea than we were of Clyde. So, we laid the whole thing to rest, barely speaking over it, and simply prayed someone would soon die of natural causes. But 3 nights later, I was awoken by the chimes. I sat bolt upright, instantly awake, and filled with a bottomless sense of dread. Despite the fact that I'd initially thought we wouldn't be able to help whomever stumbled into Clyde's domain, I was driven by the urgent feeling to try. I only lived 5 blocks from the cemetery, and someone was about to die. I had to try. I didn't even touch my phone, just leapt from my bed and ran. I ran until my lungs felt like they'd explode, but didn't slow at all. Within a half block, I could see who was standing before the black iron fence to the graveyard. It was Jacob. He seemed frozen to a spot. Clyde was tearing through the grass and the graves, covering an alarming amount of ground, and Jacob looked absolutely paralyzed by fear. Whatever he'd planned for this big heroic mission had been overridden by terror in the presence of the gravedigger. "Oh my God, hold your breath," I said, trying to pick up my frantic pace. I was moving faster than Clyde, but Clyde had a lot less ground to cover to reach Jacob. "Hold your breath! Jacob, hold your breath!" I screamed as my feet continued to pound the pavement. I was almost to my friend by the time my demand had left my lips. Snapped out of his trance by my voice, Jacob slowly turned his head to look at me. I got to him just as Clyde reached through the fence. My fingertips grazed Jacob's sleeve, even as Clyde yanked him brutally into the bars. Without a second's hesitation, Clyde ripped out Jacob's throat with his teeth. I stared in horror as the life drained from my friend. Somewhere in my mind, I heard my mother's voice then. "Jason, hold your breath." But the words did not compute as I gulped in desperate breaths of air. Clyde's face snapped up. If he'd had eyes, they would have been trained on me. He released Jacob, and my dead friend slid sloppily to the ground. Clyde began to amble clumsily toward the opening in the gate, which was merely 10 feet away. He would soon get out of the graveyard, and I had no weapon with me. Hot tears streaming down my cheeks, I finally collected myself enough to suck in a giant breath of air into my lungs and hold it there. Clyde stopped in his tracks. His head with the dead empty eye sockets stayed trained in my direction for just a second. Then he turned and ambled back toward Jacob's fallen body. I turned and I ran. Days later, after Jacob's horribly sad funeral, when my family had returned home, I walked into the kitchen where my mother was making coffee. "Mom?" I asked. She turned and gave me a sad smile. "Do you remember how you always said to hold your breath when you pass a cemetery?" Mom's pretty face fell. I watched the color drain from her cheeks. I whispered, "Do you know the story behind that superstition?" Her eyes darkened, and it seemed a shadow fell across her face. "No, sweetie," she said softly. "Just an old superstition." She was lying. I could see it. She knew the truth. We moved away not long after that. We stuck around just long enough for my parents to find a place for us to go. A place that wasn't anywhere near a graveyard.